Leadership is communication. Communication is leadership. That's how Jenn Chase, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at SAS, a global analytics giant, approaches her job. Today, you'll hear how she prepares to be an effective speaker and also her aha moment when she realized that she really needed to hone her skills to make sure that she felt she could do her job to best effect. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Karin Reed. I'm a 4-time author, Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist, and communication expert on helping people to own the room, whether it be a physical one or a virtual one. Welcome to Speaker Dynamics. So Jennifer Chase, I'm going to call you Jen because we are friends. But I am delighted that you're here. I think it's so valuable for people who are leaders, emerging leaders, to hear how you came to be the communicator you are. So I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
A lot of fun. So let's begin though, just by helping people to understand who SAS is, who you work for, because I know it, you know it, but let's let our listeners understand as well. What is SAS?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Karin. So SAS, we are a data and AI company. We have been around for nearly 50 years, and we have been throughout that entire time committed to solving some of the world's most pressing analytical challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are the Chief Marketing Officer. And so I think I have an idea of how you're going to answer this, but I'm going to throw it out to you. What role does communication play in what you do?
I think there's two dimensions to the role that communication plays. One is internal and then one is external. And there's probably multiple layers within each of those. From an internal perspective, in my role, I'm a member of the executive leadership team here at the company. So communicating to our employees and partners, as well as my role in leading the marketing team. And so in both of those cases, I'm communicating what our vision is as the organization. What's our strategy? What's our plan and the progress we're making against that? This year we've had as a company and in my marketing organization, an even greater emphasis on elevating the communications we have with our manager community. We just know they've got a really tough job. It is hard to be people leading. I mean, we want to make sure we're giving them all the tools that they need. So we've had really elevated communications to our manager community. So that's, I think, internal, that dimension of internal. From an external dimension, it's my role to really have the brand communication, brand voice. And we've evolved our brand voice as a company over the past few years. We've got a new ambition. We said that we're headed towards public markets. And so our company has gone from probably being pretty humble and known as a quiet giant to setting this new tone of being ambitious and optimistic and disruptively smart. So communication plays a huge role in getting all of those messages and that tone across.
And I've had the pleasure of listening to you speak in multiple different venues across multiple platforms, from up on stage at the big conferences to, doing something like this. Is public speaking something that has always come easily to you? Because you make it look really easy.
So that's one of the greatest compliments I can get. But I would say yes and no. Does it come easily to me? I loved hearing about your origin story, and I'll tell you just briefly on mine of why public speaking has been, I think, always a part of me. I grew up performing, but I performed on skates. So I was a figure skater growing up since the age of 2 and went on to skate competitively. So I always had this familiarity of performing in front of a crowd, and large crowds in some cases, of being judged. Quite literally, you were being judged and you were going to get numbers based on your performance and you were going to be ranked relative to competitors. So I have a lot of lifelong lessons that I got from figure skating, but one of them is being much more comfortable performing and recognizing that to perform at your best, It takes hard work and determination and practice and rehearsals. So there's that part, I think, has been ingrained in me since I was a child. I was a communications major in college, so I at that time started to really hone the ability and importance of communication. But I never necessarily saw myself as being the one who was doing all the communicating. I would be a supporting cast member in that, and I think today I play a role as both a supporting cast member and as the presenter. So. Yeah, I think one of the greatest compliments I get is what you just said, is that I make it look natural. It's not natural. In fact, it takes practice. It doesn't always feel that way, but practice is what helps me feel more natural.
So when you're talking about your ice skating, I was thinking about, like, after you do a presentation, can you imagine if everyone in the audience like held up numbers and told you like how well you did? You got like a 6.5 that day. Like, that would be terrifying, absolutely terrifying. But let's talk a little bit about how you prepare, how you practice, because I know that you are a big believer in preparation, and this is something I would like to spread out to the world, because I see this as something that not all folks take the time to do. What does your prep look like?
Yeah. And I loved, you mentioned this in one of your earlier podcasts, that was it for every minute. Think you need an hour to prepare. And I think that is such a smart rule of thumb. Preparation is so important to me. I often joke at SAS, I may not be, there's a lot of smart people at this company, and I may not be the smartest one in the room, but I can be the most prepared. And I often am. And I pride myself on that. In fact, I think that preparation is an antidote to imposter syndrome. Whenever I have a little bit of imposter syndrome creeping in for me, it's usually because I have not prepared to the level that makes me comfortable. And so it's taken me years to acknowledge that. There's a little bit of my, I think, maturity now that I have around imposter syndrome, but it's usually because I haven't prepared. And so I do invest a lot of time, as you talked about. That time rule of thumb is really important. There are some tools, many of which you've armed me with, of how to think about really your audience and putting your message in a way that the audience is going to hear. Being very, I'll work through my messages, and then I'll go back and trim it down, because oftentimes I'm using too many words to say something I could have said much more simply. So it is that focus on the audience, iteration, and then in the end, find places to cut.
Right. Exactly. Well, I mean, you can listen to Albert Einstein, who says, everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. And, very wise words from a brilliant person, right? But I totally get that. And I think if you tell people 1 minute of presentation, 1 hour of prep, like, people start to freak out. But I mean, that's for the really high stakes presentations. It's not something that is feasible for every single presentation, especially at your level that you're doing when you're going into, meetings with your colleagues and with your team. But I'm so glad that you stress the importance of that and the value of that. I spend a lot of time in executive presence, leadership presence, professional presence. And, in my view, like, leadership presence is all about communication. And I think you probably also agree with that. But, in your role as a leader, in your observations of other folks who are leading, how do you think strong presence manifests when it comes to leadership communication?
Yeah, I mean, I think you made a point there that's so true. Like, to lead is to communicate. You can't take those two things apart. Like, if you're going to be a leader, you have to be prepared to communicate. You may have a communications team that's there to support you, but you are still responsible for the communication. And I think that's so critical. For me, my leadership style has always been to communicate authentically, which means I'm not always perfect. In fact, actually, I never am. So, and I've come to be okay with that. And in fact, I've gotten better feedback that, when you're not on a script, it actually comes across as more authentic. And I think that to me is so much more important. I saw a fantastic article that I'd recommend to your readers from Harvard Business Review recently on leadership presence. And I think there's some interesting changes that are happening right now of what people value from their leaders in terms of their leadership presence. And confidence and decisiveness have never gone out of style, but inclusiveness in all of its manifestations, whether it's how you are listening to others, how you're learning, how you're conveying authenticity, that shot up really high on the list. And I think that's what an exciting time. I think to be a leader and to be a leader, if maybe you look a little different than traditional leaders, right? You don't have to feel like you fit into a norm that's been really put upon us for many, many years. And so I think there's a great opportunity for women, for people of color, to not feel like they have to fit into a mold.
I love that.
And instead communicate with authenticity.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, authenticity is now like one of the major factors in executive presence and leadership presence, professional presence. And I love that you also brought up the idea of listening, because we think about communication as output rather than input. But listening is such a critical skill that I see a lot of leaders be really great at if they are, strong leaders. So I think that that's a really valuable thing for people to remember as well. Communication is a two-way street. So the way we communicate today has changed dramatically because we're doing something right now that most people did not do a lot of until the pandemic hit. But we first met a long time ago, whenever you took my on-camera studio training at SAS. And, we taught skills like the MVPs of on-camera success, which was primarily geared towards, okay, you're in the big studio, you're doing a video message, you're a global company, it's ginormous, and you need to get the message out. But how have the skills that you learned way back then for like the studio on-camera presentation training help you to adapt to video calls and video presentations that are done through that small camera that we're looking at right now, the webcam?
Yeah. I think there absolutely are some transferable skills from what we learned there to what we're doing every day now. I think the first is, how do you connect without getting that audience feedback? And that's tough for sure. And so that's, I think, where your listening skills and picking up on and reading nonverbals has to come in. So your training certainly helped me with that. I think the second is around eye contact. And honestly, that's something I still struggle with. Even now, I'm looking into the camera and I want to look down at your face so bad.
Okay, you can still glances, Jen. I won't sting you for that. Like, that's valuable. It's not like we're staring into the camera, right? Like, that would feel weird. So so you can look down. Okay.
That's right. But eye contact and really, thinking of the camera as that, as one of the audience members. I think that is has been a really a lasting lesson that you taught me in that course.
That's awesome. And I always think it's interesting how if they're showing like a stock photo of somebody on a video call, nobody's ever looking down in those stock photos. They're always looking like directly into the camera lens. I'm like, there's a reason for that. Do what they show is the best practice. But I know it's hard and it takes a lot of like mental jujitsu to try to get past that. So true. Well done. Well done that you're doing that. One of the things that you also are faced with, because SAS is a global company with global customers, is trying to, communicate as a leader, acknowledging that there are some cultural norms that you need to be aware of that might be different than the ones that you are accustomed to. How do you manage that cross-cultural leadership communication?
Yeah. I think culture is one of the more exciting things that I get to experience in my role. SAS has over 12,000 employees in 140 plus countries. And last year, I actually had the chance to travel quite a bit for an event called SAS Innovate that we then took on tour. And it was amazing to get to experience different cultures firsthand. And I think there's some basics around communication that we need to keep in mind in those scenarios. First and foremost, something I have to constantly remind myself, which is to slow down. And that's even more critical when you're in countries where English is the second language. And so really being very deliberate with your pacing and very intentional with your word choice so that it can be understood, really taking jargon out, recognizing that humor in your culture probably isn't going to translate in a way that you would like in other cultures. And so, for me, authentically, I tend to use some sarcasm. I have to make sure I tone that down in different cultures. But one of my more memorable experiences was getting the chance to travel to Japan. And there I really relied on the local teams at SAS to help me be successful in those communications, whether it was at the employee town hall with local media or on stage at an event in front of 400 customers. And there's such beautiful cultural norms in Japan. How you accept and deliver your business card with two hands and take the chance to receive it and read that. And it was just a beautiful moment. Like, I just felt like you were really honoring and the individual you were meeting, and something I'd love to see us adopt in other cultures. What I wore, I would not wear this my signature pink in Japan. I needed to respect local norms in terms of what they would expect an executive to be wearing, and so I wore more conservative suits in darker colors, right? So I think that adhering to the cultures is a sign of respect, and it's going to make sure that you're able to communicate your message more effectively.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I often see people get tripped up by is the tolerance and expectations for cultural or for conversational silence. Western cultures, oh my gosh, after about 2 seconds of silence, we freak out and we want to fill it. But in some Eastern cultures, there is not just a tolerance, but an expectation of silence for up to 8 seconds. And if you fill in that gap really quickly, you might think, wow, they're just not talking. No, it's not that. They're just not given an opportunity to speak because you're filling it with your own voice or calling on the person who is from a Western culture who feels very comfortable speaking up immediately. But that 8 seconds can be a sign of respect. And, not acknowledging that is a challenge, especially for leaders who are hoping to pull out participation from all voices, not just the loudest, and reflects their own.
That's a really good point, which leads me to, we also had translators for several conversations. And so you have to be very intentional about short, concise message, pause, allow for the translator to interpret, translate, and then get that communication back. And so, the amount of time you can leave some white space in the room for some digestion of the content is really important.
I want people to imagine that they have a translator after all of their key takeaways. So like they force themselves to pause and let the good words sink in. Like, I feel like it's not just for cross-cultural, it's just for everything, because pauses are so hard. But just to let you know, Jen, I've been doing this a long time, and I was doing a global workshop, and I had somebody who was from, I think she's from the Netherlands, and she said, "You're talking too fast." And I said, "Thank you so much for telling me
great
that."
feedback.
That's
incredible feedback.
Yes. And I was so grateful for it, because I'm like, you know what? I am talking too fast. Thank you for telling me. And so we all need those reminders, even those who espouse best practices. It's really valuable. And actually, to that point, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your desire to get feedback. Because I know that's something that you actively seek out. And it's interesting because I do find that the higher people move up the corporate ladder, there tends to be less of that honest feedback given to them because they're almost afraid. So what is your approach? Well, first of all, why you get, solicit that feedback, and then how do you get them to be candid with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the higher up you get, the more information is curated before it gets to you. And so, and people might be afraid to give you feedback. And so I have worked really hard to cultivate an environment where people are comfortable giving me feedback. And in fact, I subscribe to a couple of ideas inspired by Adam Grant, who I love. But one is to have truth tellers, to have people who you regularly call on to give you feedback, and they know that it's a safe space and that you're going to listen. And it doesn't mean you're going to take into account all of their feedback, but that you take into account their feedback. And so I do have a group of truth tellers. Before I do a big presentation, oftentimes I'll send it to them in advance saying, here's what I'm thinking. Give me some feedback. we actually, as part of the marketing leadership team 2 years ago, implemented what we call a marketing advisory council. And part of their role, this is our leadership bench, and their role is to provide feedback to the marketing organization on either new strategies we're putting in place, new process we're putting in place, but getting that feedback in advance. And oftentimes that includes how we're going to communicate about it. Another way I hopefully disarmed people into providing me feedback.
Yeah.
And this is another Adam Grant lesson, which was when you ask for feedback, it's important how you ask. Right? You have to ask for it in a way that creates some psychological safety amongst everybody around you. And so one of the tactics I've used is when somebody says, hey, that was a great presentation, I'll say, well, thank you. How could I get it to be a 10 next time? So then people aren't thinking, oh, I got to tell her something that was bad about it. Yeah. They're saying, oh, she really wants to improve. This is about how to get to a 10. And I don't think I ever walk out of a presentation at a 10, right? There's always room for improvement. And so asking for feedback in that way has resulted in me getting more actionable feedback, I believe.
Yeah. Speaking of that, in our conversation that we had, and kind of a prep conversation, you did share with me a moment that it was a moment of vulnerability. Are you okay sharing it today?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I would love to.
Yes. So tell me a little bit about that and how it shaped your desire to improve your communication.
Yeah. In fact, one of the earlier sessions that I had with you is because I had the opportunity to present. And I was terrible. Like, I know I was terrible. and as I reflect back on it, I still remember that feeling of being on stage and knowing this was not going well. And it was hard to change course at that point. And so this was an internal meeting at SAS, and I was asked to present some work we were doing related to our marketing campaigns. And I was being tapped by my boss at the time and my boss's boss. So two levels up were providing me this platform, and I knew they believed in me and they were giving me a chance to present my work in front of the entire organization. And I went in and I thought, oh, I know this content. This is what I do every day, right? Of course I can share the work that I'm doing, but I didn't take the time to prepare and think about the audience who isn't doing it every day and is not going to understand the way I'm describing this. And I saw people just glaze over. They're picking their phones up. And in my mind, I'm going, this is a train wreck. This is awful. I might as well be up here naked. This is terrible. So I was not happy, and I was committed to never let that happen again. Now, I don't think I've ever presented that poorly ever again. I've certainly not always been an 8, if which is where I'd want to be. Yeah. But that was a real wake up call for me. That that's where preparation really sunk in for me. Of all right, just because I know the content doesn't mean I know how to communicate the content. Yeah. And if I'm going to get the platform to communicate it, I need to make sure I'm prepared to do so.
So that's awesome that you had that bad experience. You're like, okay, I'm never going to feel that way again, but you didn't run away from additional opportunities to speak. Because I've honestly had situations where I've had C-level executives who said, I never want to present. I'm turning down speaking opportunities, which I know would benefit my company, but I'm afraid. What advice do you have for those reluctant leaders? And how would you encourage them to embrace those speaking opportunities?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to remember as a leader, whether you're a leader today or aspiring to be a leader, you have a perspective and people want to hear it. So you can make a difference by communicating and sharing your perspective. It doesn't mean, don't ever think that it's going to be something that you're comfortable with, but you're going to make a difference if you do take that platform and communicate. I would say make sure you surround yourself with people, your own personal board of directors, people who can help you make some decisions about, is that the right speaking opportunity for me? Or I've been given this platform. How do I get prepared for it? Find those supporters, your board of directors who can encourage you and support you. And then you got to train. I think find ways to, whether you join Toastmasters and you find opportunities to exercise public speaking, you'll get more comfortable if you do.
Jenn, I always like to leave our listeners with one big takeaway, something that they can chew on until the next episode. So I'm going to toss it out to you based upon our conversation about leadership communication and the wisdom that you've gathered over your career of learning how to hone your communication skills. What is the one big takeaway that you would offer to them?
This probably isn't going to be a surprise. There's a theme throughout this entire podcast, and that's prepare. I think success is where preparation and opportunity meet, and you can create both of those. And you have to prepare.
Jenn Chase, thank you so much for offering all of these good tidbits and pearls of wisdom over the past half hour. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your crazy schedule.
It's my pleasure. It was so great talking to you, Karin.
You too. I think I could have talked to Jenn for about 4 hours, and that is the only issue with these podcasts. I promised you that each episode would be 30 minutes or less, but there's always some good content, good bits of conversation that don't quite fit into that half-hour slot. So that's why we have created kind of a mini episode that you can access on the Speaker Dynamics website. So if you go to speakerdynamics.com/bonus content, once again, speakerdynamics.com/bonus content, you can get access to a mini episode where I continue the conversation with Jenn, and she shares her answer to the question, what advice would you give to your younger self about leadership communication? It's a really interesting answer. So do check it out if you can. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Until next time.